In every podcast tips video I've watched about getting more views for your podcast, it says do not start your podcast with like a welcome to and then your podcast name. I really, really hate that because that's my favorite part of my podcast. So, welcome to Butter Thoughts, where the LSD. Wait, whoa. Redo. Welcome to Butter Thoughts, where the butter of your. Wait. I'm trying to do this with all of the bloopers because I think it's fun. So, let's do it again. Welcome to Butter Thoughts, where the butter of your LSD meets the awesome rockin' pan brain of your universe. And now for fresh out of the pan. So I just got diagnosed with bipolar 1 and inattentive ADHD and PTSD. We've always known something was really weird, especially like 5 years ago, something was really thrown off. But this is important context for the story I'm going to tell you, and it's a little embarrassing, so here we go. We went to Idaho for the 4th of July to stay with my grandparents, and I didn't sleep at all. Our dog Gus was up all night, trying to walk on our baby that slept great all night, and it bugged me because I was like, dude, the baby's sleeping, why aren't you asleep? Anyway, I was up at like 4 in the morning, and I decided to just sit up and start getting ready at 6. And so I was sitting there, not barbecue sauce. I was sitting there in my tent, and I heard this heavy breathing, and I was like, what the heck? Like, the sun is coming up. What kind of beast roams in the daytime? And so I sat there and I was like, nah, that must just be me because, I hallucinate and stuff. I've never hallucinated like that before, where it's like heavy, weird breathing, but I was like, okay, I'm tired. And then a little bit later, my husband wakes up and he's like, what's that noise? Right when we hear it again. And I'm like, oh no. And so I just had a million different things going through my head, and I was like, what is that? And so I sit there and I kind of come to the conclusion that it's like my mom's dogs, because she has 3 huge Tibetan Mastiffs, and I was like, maybe they got out of their kennels in the barn. And so she has like a big male one named Jonesy, who's still a puppy, but he's really sweet. Useless context. But I was like, Jonesy, come here, buddy. And my husband starts making fun of me, and I'm just sitting there like, what the heck is going on? So I get out, and I'm just looking around, and I'm walking around, and I don't see anything. Like there's mountain lions in Idaho, and there have been sightings. And of course my grandpa was making fun of me later, like, oh yeah, there were some like down by the river a little bit ago, and like down by like the store. And I was like, okay, grandpa, what are you saying to me right now? Anyway, I get out of the tent and I go check the barn, and all of the dogs are in their kennels, and I'm like, that was dumb to think they could even get out, but they're actually there. So I go back in the tent and I'm like, I'm just gonna wait, and if I hear it, I'll just jump out really fast. So I'm in the tent and I hear like the and then I'm like, okay, what the freak is that? Because it's walking around the tent, and then I was like, why does it sound like it's above us? And then all of a sudden it goes like, and I was like, no, because there were these giant freaking raven crow things above our tent in this huge tree that we love, that's been at my grandparents like forever, obviously because it's a tree. But these like ravens, these huge birds, have been sitting in the tree just like eating all these little animals, like little birds, and like they're that big that they can just eat whatever they want. And supposedly they can sound like mountain lions. Either that or it was choking on like an animal that it ate that was too big, because it did sound like it could have been choking after I heard the heavy breathing. Either way, it is unconfirmed that it was a crow, because I didn't get out and look. I was just so like, what the heck? And so, I don't know. There is that story. But speaking of paranoia, I want to introduce Thoughts on Toast. I'm going to use this episode kind of as a introduction to psychosis because I kind of want to talk about something that means a lot to me so that it's actually easy to talk about. So, I've been experiencing psychosis for almost 6 years, and yeah, not very fun, but special terms to know. I'm just going to go through a few. First, psychosis. It's seeing, feeling, believing, I don't know, man, what the heck. Psychosis is believing, seeing, hearing, feeling, or even smelling things that aren't real. So even if you believe something and it's false, it's psychosis. Psychosis can be triggered by drugs, depression, stress, and an underlying condition. That's pretty much just like genetics that you don't know about. I did read that even if you have the genetic disposition for like bipolar and things like that, it's almost like you load a gun, but then you need something to trigger that shot to actually like see the symptoms. So like with my bipolar, I really think it was just like intense stress and drug use that triggered it. So psychosis isn't just like something that shows up in your brain. It is something that is built into your brain, and that is called a framework of psychosis. There's 5 to 6 different stages of it, and people don't usually notice what's going on until stages like 2 to 5, which is really crazy. The first is called trauma, and it's kind of like impending doom. Like you don't really notice anything delusional going on. The person just feels really depressed and just has unexplained dread, and it's often mistaken for severe depression and anxiety. Like you just feel like something really bad is going to happen, and it's intense because you don't know when this feeling is going to stop. During this time for me, it was really hard. I didn't know why I was struggling. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't go to school and nothing felt normal. And everyone around me did not feel the same. Just no one understood. Because of these feelings and abuse that I was going through, and just, I don't know, I felt like a really sensitive kid. That might be because of the ADHD or anything else going on, but I turned to drug use and alcohol use, and as the weight from those feelings got heavier, my drug use got heavier. And I started staying out all night, which probably triggered a lot. I didn't understand what I was doing, but I was staying out all night because I didn't need to sleep and I didn't feel like I needed to sleep, which is one of the biggest symptoms of mania. That is when I moved into stage 2 of psychosis, which is called epiphany, and that is when the connections start building. In psychosis, everything that happens around you and in your head seems very important, and that is because you're going through a really hard time, you're very vulnerable, and your brain is mistaking literal things for symbolic things. For example, I thought I had like 6 different soulmates during a year of psychosis, which is so bad. One of them wasn't even a real person. I'll explain that sometime, just not now. So like I saw this kid at the grocery store. It's horrible because he still works there. And we went to school together in elementary school. Oh no. So when I was in psychosis, I saw him at the grocery store and I was like, oh my gosh, we know each other. And of course my brain was like, he's here because he's your soulmate. And to no one else in the world would this make sense. But little things like this to people with psychosis, your brain makes it make sense by the way that you feel. And it's not random. It's like psychosis is built from how you grew up as a child and your feelings as you grew up and just any experience you've been through in your life. So for mine, I know that I was feeling very lonely and I felt like I wasn't loved. So my brain was making all of these connections to gain that love. And that's why I had so many different soulmates, because I was really missing that in my life. So stage 2, epiphany, can often be mistaken for being too deeply rooted in a hobby or just overthinking. Like your brain is going a million miles a minute. People say like, that's weird, but then they just move on. They're like, oh, that person's just weird, and that's it. Stage 3 is called anastrophe. I call this like the like the reality flip. This is mistaken for narcissism, attention seeking, or a mental health episode. By this time, people with psychosis get very intense because their whole reality is getting built up by their brain and by what their psychosis is telling them. At this time in my psychosis, I was still smoking. It was just like pedal to the metal, just building this thing up fast. And I started hallucinating, so I was hearing voices, and I told my dad, who I was living with at the time, and his ex-wife, who was not his ex-wife at the time, that I was hearing voices, and I thought that there were like some weird kind of cameras in our house and that people were watching me. And obviously they were like, we don't hear anything. They just kind of brushed it off. So it was hard, and I figured out in my brain, they don't believe me, they're not going to listen, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but my brain just snapped. It was like, they don't know, I shouldn't tell them anything else. So I didn't mention anything else, and this made things really hard for when things got really bad in stage 4. That is called consolidation, and I call that fully dried cement, because this is the full-blown peak of psychosis. This is when people really notice, but it's kind of too late, because once that psychosis is built, once it's fully set, no one can pull you out of it except for yourself, which is so hard. It's almost like having a baby and having them grow up, because you can teach them while they're growing, but once they're grown up, it's their decision. And I haven't exactly gotten to that place with my child. She's turning a year old, and that freaks me out because I don't want to get there. So stage 4, consolidation, people mistake it for being deeply rooted in weird beliefs, if they don't notice by then, which they should. But this is where the behavior matches the psychosis. For example, in my psychosis, I thought that I was being listened to by people constantly, and that they could hear my thoughts and everything that I could hear. So I had no privacy, and that's something that I value very deeply. So I stopped going to the bathroom. I tried very hard not to. I stopped doing anything that was embarrassing if I thought about it or if I was doing it. Like, showering was horrible. And during my whole episode of psychosis, it was really hard. Like, I did not want to do certain things or think about sacred things because they would just ruin it. It was horrible. And so my behavior started to match that, because, I don't know, I had a million things going on in my head. Like, I thought I was possessed, that I had telepathy, and that I was cursed by Satan, and I'd have all these false memories and flashbacks of Satan telling me these things. And not only that, but I felt like I was being choked by demons every day. And I know what it feels like to be choked, and let me tell you, it is real. Or just like real feeling. Anyway, stage 5 is residuum, and it's the new baseline. So if the person with psychosis is left untreated, they'll just live in that reality. And people can mistake it for them being recovered, because they just stop talking to people about it. Like, it looks like they're functioning and it looks like they're good. But in reality, they lose their motivation, they lose their emotions, and they feel flat, and they're still experiencing psychosis. They just don't trust you anymore. And this one is confusing for me because I've seen it in myself. It's kind of like denial, but hopefully the stage after this comes. The 6th stage, and not always the last stage, is remission. And people can also mistake this for full recovery. This is because psychosis is like a wildfire. Even if the fire is put out, everything is just charred and dead. So really, that person feels like they can do more than they can. And people expect them to do more than they can, even though you're out of psychosis, things are fine. And I do this to myself all the time, and I know that other people do too. It's just that it's hard because it looks like you've been struggling for a long time. I know it makes people tired, it makes you tired, like you just want to be done with it. And you just need time to heal from that. Like, even if you're out of psychosis, it does cause pretty heavy trauma, and it leaves that in your body, and it stays in your head, just because psychosis isn't a thing where you're like, oh, this might be real. It's your brain completely telling you this is real. Your gut feels this is real. In most of my journals, I wrote in journals the entire time I had psychosis. Every single one said, I know this is real. Everyone is telling me that it's not. And the only thing that made me come out of it was like getting a blessing from my grandpa and reading my scriptures, and slowly I think the spirit kind of gave me that gut feeling where I was like, I don't think this is real. And then that slowly grew and grew until I got another blessing from my grandpa that was kind of like, you have a chemical imbalance and you should take your medications, you should do everything that you can. After that point, I went into remission, because up until that point, it was really bad. So here are some more terms for psychosis. These are characteristics that make up psychosis. Not everybody has the same symptoms or like all of the characteristics, but here are all of them. The number one is delusions. These are like strongly false held beliefs that are not based on reality. So that's a huge part of psychosis. It's just the beliefs that aren't real, and that they will not change in your head whether they're presented with evidence that they're not. The second is hallucinations. This can be any of your senses that aren't real but feel real. So like hearing, and the five senses, but like I thought it was interesting because I didn't know that there were tactile hallucinations, like you can feel things, or that you could smell things other than hearing and seeing things. So I thought that was cool. And then there's disorganized thinking, just like confused, jumbled speech. This kind of makes communicating difficult, but makes it a little bit easier to spot that something's going on. And then there's changes in behavior or emotions, where like your emotions just flip really fast. You withdraw from family and friends, and you don't take care of yourself anymore. So I'm taking a class. My mom and my uncle and my aunt kind of took care of me while I was in psychosis for a year. And they talked to this guy who is a schizophrenic. He is like a social worker, an author, and a mental health advocate, but his name is Milk Greek. He actually has a series on psychosis on YouTube that I've learned a lot from, and his class is really cool. But he talked to my mom a lot during my psychosis and just kind of helped her through it. Why I bring that up is because people aren't the same after they have psychosis, and it feels really sad, and it's hard to deal with, but really everyone changes through life, and you can never go back to the way that you were. You can only grow better. So really, the fact that you have gone through psychosis, or with the person that you love, it's not a bad thing, because that's a really hard thing, and if they overcome it, they will just be that much stronger. And that's the same with anything that we go through in life. But Milk Greek basically said that after you have psychosis, the things that you learn from psychosis, like the coping mechanisms and the things that get you through it, you need for recovery and for the rest of your life to just deal with it. And I thought that that was really cool. And now it is time for Butter Your Perspective. Okay, I'll try not to read this too much. I have notes and I get distracted, but I just want to talk. So in 1978, a professor of engineering named Robert Narum had an experiment that he wanted to do so that he could study blood flow. And he used New Zealand white rabbits to do this, because his hypothesis was that with a high-fat diet, people would develop heart disease and like fatty tissues and plaque built up around their heart. So how he did this was he had two groups of rabbits. And he used these rabbits because they had similar hearts to us when we were on high-fat diets. That's why he was using these rabbits. Anyway, he had a control group and his other group, because every experiment needs a control. And he was feeding them both the same diet just to make sure that he would get the same results in both groups. And what he didn't expect was that he had one group of technicians taking care of the controlled group and then a different group of technicians taking care of the other group. One of the groups, the group that was not the control group, the second group, had a technician that was really nice. And she'd just give the rabbits all the loves, like she'd cuddle them, she'd talk to them, and she would feed them like while she held them. And this may not seem like it's important. It is important because it changed the whole experiment. They actually ended up redoing the whole experiment just to test if what happened in the first experiment was true. So what happened in the first experiment was that this girl giving all of the rabbits loves in the second group let me say this the right way. It made the plaque around their heart 60% less than the controlled group of rabbits. So they had 60% less plaque on their hearts. So they were given the same diet, and it's insane because, I have to read this part, both groups of rabbits had identical heart rates, cholesterol, and blood pressure. So it wasn't like the change was completely everything in their body. It was just that physically, the negative aspects of the heart disease was 60% less because they were feeling loved. And I think that was because, they said it was because of the stress response, which is cortisol, and the kindness response, that is oxytocin. So this study just confirmed that love can not only be emotionally healing, but physically healing. In a way, I think that love can also heal our spirits, not just our brains, with chemicals. And I think it's something that we all need. It's a really special thing. But I think it's time for the butter prescription. So some things that helped me with my psychosis, like coping strategies. Here's a list of those things. That's what I'm trying to say. Number 1 is temperature shifts. People always say, go splash your face with some cold water. That is not true. Hold your face in that cold water as long as you can. Make it the coldest water that you can. And if you can't hold your face in it for 5 minutes, just keep dipping your face in it, because it literally works if you do it for a long time. But if I just splash cold water on my face, that does nothing. Also, symptom and mood tracking journals and apps. These are great because not only does it help you figure out what your triggers are, like what you're going through and what triggers your symptoms, it also builds kind of like a map to what your diagnosis is. You can share this with your doctor, and they can get you on medications that can help you with those and pick special therapies that will be good for you. Another one, I'm going to stop counting. Another one is listening to music. Angry music and stressful music isn't always the best unless you really need an outlet in that moment. Even if you need an outlet, I would just suggest moving from the woo kind of music to the woo kind of music. Anything that you like can be a coping strategy as long as it's healthy. I will add that. So singing, audiobooks, crafts, exercise, sports. You need to drink water and eat healthy to keep everything in your brain going good. Vitamin D, omega-3s, and protein are huge, especially for psychosis, because they give you energy. It not only gives you energy just for a little bit. When I've been taking it this last month, the vitamin D and the omega-3s, they sustain my energy all day. And it's so cool. And I eat protein for every meal. Reading out loud is great because it just kind of breaks up the thoughts in your head. And here are some therapies that are great. Cognitive behavioral therapy. They also have that for specifically psychosis. Careful and compassionate family therapy. because if your family is against you or you feel like they're against you, that will push you deeper into psychosis. Coordinated specialty care, acceptance and commitment therapy. EMDR I heard is really good. Cognitive processing therapy is great. Narrative exposure therapy. Somatic modalities is really cool too. Sensory motor psychotherapy, and of course there's like so much more, but those are mainly for psychosis. And I don't know, there's so much that helps, especially when you find the right therapist. I mean, if they make you feel uncomfortable, they're probably not for you. But prioritize sleep during the day and rest during the... Wait, that's the opposite. Prioritize sleep during the night and rest during the day. And build a crisis plan. Any of those coping skills can be on your crisis plan. Have people's numbers, have places you can go, and stuff like that. But medications can be great. Like, they're amazing. But just remember that they are stabilizers. They're like training wheels. So, sorry, I got a bit hyped up and now I'm talking really fast, but medications should not stabilize you on their own. And people forget that. I forget that all the time. But medications allow you to use your coping skills and kind of get you on that baseline where you can take care of it yourself. Anyway, I hope you had a good time listening to this. I tried to just be calm, and I hope that you'll comment or, rate this or follow me and just leave a story on what you thought or what your experience with psychosis. And next time we'll just talk about how people with psychosis have good intentions behind their actions even when it's hard to see. And I'll cover the stigma about psychosis and why people can get violent with psychosis. So thank you for listening. Until next Tuesday, don't let life burn your toast. You stay buttery out there.